The stagecoach rattled into Snake River, Wyoming Territory, on a blistering August afternoon in 1876, carrying a woman whose hands trembled not from the rough journey but from the weight of secrets that could destroy her before she even stepped foot in her new life. Delilah Dawson pressed her gloved fingers against the worn leather seat, watching through the dusty window as wooden storefronts and weathered buildings came into view. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of structures clinging to existence in the vast Wyoming landscape, where sagebrush stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, leaving behind a life that had shattered like fine china against hard stone. The letter in her reticule, creased from countless readings, promised a new beginning with Lucas Henderson, a rancher who needed a wife, and had placed an advertisement in the eastern newspapers seeking a respectable woman to share his life. Respectable. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside the depot, and Delilah took a steadying breath. Through the window, she could see a tall man standing apart from the small crowd that had gathered. He removed his hat as the driver climbed down, revealing dark hair that caught the sunlight. Even from this distance, she could see the breadth of his shoulders beneath a simple cotton shirt, the way he held himself with quiet confidence. Lucas Henderson, the man who knew nothing of what she truly was. "Madam," the driver opened the door, extending a weathered hand. "We have arrived." Delilah accepted his assistance, her boots touching Wyoming soil for the first time. The air smelled different here, dry and clean, carrying hints of pine from the mountains and dust from the unpaved street. She smoothed her traveling dress, acutely aware of the tall man approaching. "Miss Dawson." His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a gentleness that surprised her. "Yes." Her own voice came out steadier than she felt. "Mr. Henderson." Lucas nodded, and she saw his eyes clearly now, a warm brown that studied her with open curiosity rather than judgment. He was younger than his letters had suggested, perhaps 30 at most, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors and fine lines at the corners of his eyes that hinted he smiled often. "Welcome to Snake River. I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long, but I managed." Delilah watched as he gestured to the driver to unload her trunk. She had brought little with her, only what she could carry, and what would not raise questions about her past. "I have rooms arranged for you at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house," Lucas said, lifting her trunk with ease. "I thought you might want time to rest and settle before we discuss arrangements. The justice of the peace can marry us whenever you are ready, but there is no rush. I want you to be certain." This kindness caught her off guard. The men she had known in Philadelphia had taken what they wanted without consideration for anyone else's comfort. "That is very thoughtful. I figure marriage is a big step, especially when you have traveled so far to be here. Least I can do is give you space to breathe." Lucas started walking down the main street, and Delilah fell into step beside him. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside town. I have a good herd building, a sturdy house, and the land is beautiful. I think you will like it, but if you decide this is not what you want, I will pay for your return passage. No obligations." Delilah felt something tighten in her chest. She had not expected this level of decency. "You would do that, even after paying for my journey here?" "I want a wife who wants to be here, not one who feels trapped." Lucas glanced at her, and she saw sincerity in his expression. "I lost my first wife 3 years ago in childbirth, lost the baby too. Took me this long to feel ready to try again, but I learned from that pain that life is too short to build a home on anything but honesty and respect." The mention of his first wife stirred guilt in Delilah's stomach. She was building their potential future on deception, carrying secrets that would surely drive him away if he knew. But what choice did she have? Returning to Philadelphia meant returning to danger, to men who had already proven what they would do to her. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a tidy two-story building painted white with green shutters. The proprietor, a plump woman with kind eyes and gray hair pinned in a neat bun, greeted them warmly. "You must be Miss Dawson. Welcome, dear. I have the best room ready for you with a view of the mountains." "Thank you." Delilah managed a genuine smile as Mrs. Patterson took charge, shooing Lucas out with promises that she would ensure their guest was properly settled. The room was simple but clean, with a comfortable bed covered in a wedding ring quilt, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin, and indeed, a window that framed the distant mountains in golden afternoon light. Delilah sat on the bed once she was alone, her hands finally free to shake. She had done it. She had escaped Philadelphia, escaped the man who would have killed her if she had stayed. But the price of that escape was etched into her skin, hidden beneath the modest dress, a constant reminder of what she had endured. A knock at the door startled her. "Miss Dawson." "I brought fresh water and towels," Mrs. Patterson called. Delilah opened the door, accepting the items gratefully. The older woman lingered, her expression warm. "Lucas Henderson is a good man, dear. One of the best I know. He has had his share of sorrow, but he has a big heart. I hope you two will be happy together." "I hope so too," Delilah said, meaning it more than Mrs. Patterson could know. That evening, Lucas returned to take her to dinner at the town's small restaurant. As they walked through Snake River's streets in the cooling dusk, he pointed out the various establishments. "That is the general store, run by Martin Cross and his wife Sarah. The smithy is owned by Tom Raid, does good work. The church is at the end of the street, though we only have a circuit preacher who comes through once a month." "How long have you lived here?" Delilah asked, watching the way lamplight began to glow in windows as businesses closed for the day. "I came to Wyoming Territory 8 years ago, right after the war ended and things were still raw back east. Wanted to build something new, something that was mine." Lucas held the door to the restaurant open for her. "Started with nothing but determination, and a piece of land nobody else wanted. Now I have 200 head of cattle and a house that does not leak when it rains." The restaurant was busy, filled with ranch hands and townspeople enjoying their evening meals. Several people greeted Lucas warmly, their eyes curious as they took in Delilah. She felt their scrutiny like a physical touch, wondering if somehow they could see through her careful facade to the truth beneath. They sat at a small table near the window, and Lucas ordered for them both, pot roast with vegetables and fresh bread. As they waited for the food, he folded his hands on the table and looked at her directly. "Tell me about yourself, Delilah. Your letters were kind but did not say much about your life before." Here it was, the moment she had been dreading. Delilah had rehearsed this conversation countless times during the long journey west, crafting a story that was true enough to tell without stumbling over lies but false enough to hide what mattered. "I grew up in Philadelphia. My father was a clerk, and my mother took in sewing. They both died 2 years ago in a typhoid outbreak. I had no other family and the city felt empty without them. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like fate." Most of that was true. Her parents had died, though not from typhoid. Her father had succumbed to drink and her mother to a broken heart shortly after. The emptiness was real enough. "I am sorry for your loss," Lucas said, and she could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. "Losing family is hard. I lost my parents young too, which is partly why I headed west. Sometimes starting over is the only way to heal." Their food arrived, and they ate while Lucas told her more about ranch life, the challenges of Wyoming winters, the satisfaction of watching his herd grow. He spoke with passion about the land, about the wide open spaces and the freedom they represented. Delilah found herself relaxing despite her anxiety, drawn in by his easy manner and the obvious love he had for his chosen life. "What made you decide to seek a mail-order bride?" she asked between bites of the surprisingly good pot roast. Lucas was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Loneliness, if I am honest. The ranch is doing well, but a house is not a home when you are the only one in it. I tried courting locally, but Snake River does not have many unmarried women, and the ones who are here, well, we just did not suit. I figured casting a wider net might help me find someone who wanted the same things I do." "And what do you want?" "A partner. Someone to build a life with, to share the good times and weather the hard ones together." He met her eyes across the table. "I want children someday, if God wills it, but after losing Mary and the baby, I know that is not guaranteed. Mostly I want companionship with someone I can respect and who respects me back. Maybe love will grow from that, maybe it will not, but I believe in being honest about expectations." Delilah felt that familiar twist of guilt. He was being so open with her, and she was holding back the very things that might matter most. But how could she tell him? How could she explain the scars that covered her back and shoulders, the marks left by a man who had claimed to love her but had shown his love with fists and a whip? How could she admit that she had killed him, that his body lay in a Philadelphia alley because she had finally fought back after years of abuse? "You have gone quiet," Lucas observed gently. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, no." Delilah forced a smile. "I was just thinking about how different this is from what I knew. Philadelphia was all crowds and noise and dirt. This is so open, so quiet. Does it frighten you, the quiet?" She thought about that honestly. "A little, but it also feels like I can breathe for the first time in years." Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Then I am glad you came." They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, and Lucas walked her back to the boarding house as stars began to pepper the darkening sky. At the door, he tipped his hat to her. "I will come by tomorrow morning if that suits you. Thought I could show you the ranch, let you see what you would be getting into." "I would like that," Delilah said, and realized she meant it. That night, lying in the comfortable bed at Mrs. Patterson's, Delilah stared at the ceiling and allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe she could build a new life here. Maybe the past could stay buried. Maybe Lucas Henderson would never need to know what she had done or what had been done to her. But secrets had a way of surfacing, especially in small towns where everyone knew everyone else's business. Morning came bright and clear, and Lucas arrived promptly with a wagon, helping Delilah up onto the seat beside him. The ride out to his ranch took them through rolling grassland dotted with cattle, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. The air was so clean it almost hurt to breathe, so different from Philadelphia's coal smoke and factory stench. "That is my northern boundary," Lucas pointed to a line of fence posts. "I share that fence line with the cowhounds, good neighbors. To the south is open range, though I have been thinking about buying more land if I can get the money together." The house came into view after about 30 minutes of driving, a solid log structure with a wide porch and a stone chimney. It was not large, but it looked well built and cared for, with real glass windows and a door that hung straight on its hinges. Nearby stood a barn, a chicken coop, and a small corral where several horses watched their approach with interest. "It is not fancy," Lucas said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is sturdy and warm in winter." "It is lovely," Delilah said honestly. Compared to the cramped, damp room she had rented in Philadelphia, this place looked like a palace. Lucas showed her through the house, pointing out the main room with its fireplace and simple furniture, the kitchen with a good stove and a hand pump for water right inside, and 2 bedrooms. "I sleep in the smaller one," he explained. "Thought if we married, you should have the larger room until you were comfortable with other arrangements." His consideration touched her again. "You have thought of everything." "I tried." Lucas rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I know this is all strange and new. I just want you to feel safe here." Safe. If only he knew how much that word meant to her. They spent the morning walking the property, with Lucas introducing her to his horses and showing her the garden plot where he admitted he had little success growing vegetables. "Mary had the green thumb," he said. "I can keep cattle alive just fine, but plants seem to spite me." "I helped my mother with her kitchen garden," Delilah offered. "Perhaps I could try my hand at it if I stay." "If?" Lucas looked at her searchingly. "Are you having doubts?" Delilah chose her words carefully. "I am having thoughts about whether I am what you need." "You seem like such a good man, Lucas. I would not want to disappoint you." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Delilah, I do not expect perfection. I am not perfect myself, far from it. I have a temper sometimes, though I keep it in check. I work too hard and forget to eat properly. I sing off key and cannot dance worth a damn. All I ask is that you be honest with me and give this a real chance." "Can you do that?" The irony of him asking for honesty when she was drowning in deception was not lost on her. But she nodded, unable to voice the words that would send her away from this place, this man, this chance at something better. They returned to the house for lunch, and Delilah helped Lucas prepare a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Working side by side in the kitchen felt oddly natural, and she caught herself relaxing in his presence, laughing when he told stories about his early days ranching and the mistakes he had made. "First winter, I nearly lost half my herd because I did not understand how bad the storms could get," he said, shaking his head at the memory. "My neighbor, old Bill Calhoun, came over and read me the riot act, taught me everything I needed to know about surviving out here. He passed away last year, and I still miss his advice." "You were lucky to have someone to guide you," Delilah said. "I was. This land can be unforgiving to those who do not respect it, but it rewards hard work and patience." Lucas looked at her across the rough-hewn table. "I think you could be happy here, Delilah. I truly do." She wanted to believe him, wanted it with an intensity that surprised her. They spent the afternoon on the porch, sitting in chairs Lucas had made himself, watching the cattle graze in the distance. The silence between them was comfortable, and Delilah felt some of the constant tension she carried begin to ease. Maybe she could tell him, she thought. Maybe if she explained everything, he would understand. But before she could gather her courage, Lucas spoke. "I should get you back to town before it gets late. Would you like to have dinner at my place tomorrow evening? I can pick you up in the afternoon, and we can talk more about whether this arrangement might work for both of us." "Yes," Delilah said. "I would like that very much." The ride back to Snake River was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet. When Lucas helped her down from the wagon outside Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, his hands lingered on her waist just a moment longer than necessary, and Delilah felt a flutter of something she had thought long dead in her chest. That night, she carefully removed her dress and stood before the small mirror in her room, turning so she could see her back in the reflection. The scars were still angry-looking, some old and faded, others newer. They crossed her shoulders and back in a pattern that told a story of sustained abuse, of a man who had taken pleasure in her pain. Richard Dawson had been her husband for 3 years, though she had used her maiden name of Davis when corresponding with Lucas. Richard had seemed charming at first, a successful merchant who had courted her properly after her father's death. Only after the wedding had she discovered his true nature, the rage that lived just beneath his polished exterior. The first time he had struck her, he had apologized profusely, blamed stress from work, promised it would never happen again. But it had happened again and again, each time worse than the last. When fists no longer satisfied his need to dominate, he had started using other methods. The whip had been his favorite. Delilah had endured for 3 years, trapped by laws that gave her no recourse, by a society that blamed wives for their husbands' violence. She had tried to leave once, but he had found her, and the punishment had been severe. So she had learned to be quiet, to be obedient, to survive. Until the night 2 months ago when he had come home drunk and violent, and something in her had finally broken. When he had raised the whip again, she had grabbed the heavy iron pan from the stove and swung with all her strength. The sound of it connecting with his skull had been sickening, but she had not stopped. Years of suppressed rage had poured out of her until he lay still on the floor, blood pooling around his head. She had fled that same night, taking only what she could carry, leaving him dead in their kitchen. The authorities might be looking for her even now, though she had been careful to cover her tracks, to change her name slightly in the correspondence with Lucas. Delilah Davis instead of Delilah Dawson, from Philadelphia, but listing a different street address than where she had actually lived. Looking at her reflection now, Delilah wondered how she could ever let Lucas see her. These scars would require an explanation she was not sure she could give without revealing everything. And if she revealed everything, would he turn her in? Would he be disgusted by her? But the alternative was building a marriage on lies, and after Richard's deceptions, she could not stomach that either. Sleep came fitfully that night, plagued by dreams of blood and fear. The next day passed slowly as Delilah tried to decide what to do. Mrs. Patterson invited her to help with baking, and Delilah accepted gratefully, needing the distraction. As they worked on bread and pies, the older woman chatted about town gossip and her own late husband, a kindly man who had died 5 years prior. "I miss him every day," Mrs. Patterson said, kneading dough with practiced hands. "But I am grateful for the years we had. He was a good man, patient and kind. That is what matters in a marriage, dear, kindness and patience." "Did you ever keep secrets from him?" Delilah asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Patterson looked at her thoughtfully. "Everyone has secrets, things they are ashamed of or afraid to share. But in a good marriage, those secrets eventually come to light and a good partner will love you through them. My Henry certainly loved me through mine." "What secret could you possibly have had?" Delilah could not imagine this sweet woman harboring anything dark. "I could not have children," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "A medical issue that was not diagnosed until after we married. In those days, that was grounds for annulment, and I was terrified Henry would leave me. I kept it hidden for months, making excuses, until the guilt ate at me so badly I had to confess." "Do you know what he did?" Delilah shook her head. "He held me while I cried and told me that I was enough, that he had married me, not the prospect of children. We had 40 good years together, and I never once doubted his love." Mrs. Patterson patted Delilah's hand, leaving a dusting of flour. "If you have secrets, dear, and I suspect you do from the haunted look in your eyes, trust that the right man will hear them with an open heart." The words stayed with Delilah through the afternoon as she prepared for Lucas to pick her up. She chose her simplest dress, one with a high neck and long sleeves that covered the worst of her scars, and pinned her dark hair in a neat bun. Lucas arrived promptly, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and Delilah felt that flutter again, that dangerous hope. The ride to the ranch was filled with easy conversation about the weather, about the cattle market, about nothing important. But when they reached the house and Lucas helped her down, his hands warm and steady on her waist, Delilah knew the moment of decision had come. Inside, Lucas had clearly made an effort. The table was set with what must have been his best dishes, and something savory simmered on the stove. "I made stew," he said, almost shyly. "It is about the only thing I can cook that does not end up burned." "It smells wonderful," Delilah said, her stomach tight with nerves. They ate, and Lucas told her more about his plans for the ranch, about potentially breeding horses in addition to the cattle, about wanting to build a bigger barn. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Delilah found herself drawn into his vision, imagining herself as part of it. After dinner, they moved to the porch again, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. The beauty of it made Delilah's throat tight with emotion. "I have made my decision," Lucas said quietly. "If you will have me, I would like to marry you, Delilah. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I feel a connection to you. I think we could build something good together." This was it. This was the moment where she had to choose between safety built on lies or risk built on truth. Delilah took a deep breath, her hands trembling in her lap. "Before you say that, there are things you need to know about me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Things that might change your mind." Lucas turned to face her fully, his expression serious but not unkind. "Then tell me." The words stuck in her throat, years of conditioning screaming at her to stay silent, to hide, to protect herself. But looking at Lucas's open face, at the genuine care in his eyes, something shifted in her chest. "I was married before," she began, and watched Lucas's eyebrows raise slightly, but he said nothing, just waited for her to continue. "My husband was not a good man. He hurt me for years. I tried to leave, tried to get help, but the law does not protect women from their husbands, and society blamed me for his anger." Her voice was shaking now, but she forced herself to keep going. "2 months ago, he came home drunk and violent, and I defended myself. I hit him with a pan from the stove. I did not mean to kill him, but I did. I left him there and ran. I do not know if the authorities are looking for me, but they might be." The silence that followed was deafening. Delilah could not look at Lucas, could not bear to see the disgust or fear or judgment in his eyes. She stared at her hands, waiting for him to tell her to leave, to turn her in, to condemn her as a murderer. "Look at me," Lucas said softly. It took everything in her to raise her eyes to his. "Did he hurt you badly?" Lucas asked, and there was something fierce in his voice. "Yes," Delilah whispered. "For 3 years. Show me." Her breath caught. "What? Show me what he did to you." Lucas's voice was gentle but firm. "I need to understand." With shaking hands, Delilah stood and turned her back to him. She reached for the buttons at the back of her dress, her fingers clumsy with fear. Slowly, she lowered the fabric off her shoulders, revealing the cotton chemise beneath. Then, with a deep breath, she pulled that down too, exposing her scarred back to the evening air. She heard Lucas's sharp intake of breath, felt him stand behind her. For a long moment, there was silence. Then she felt his fingers, feather light, tracing one of the scars across her shoulder blade. "He did this to you," Lucas said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "Your husband, who vowed to protect you, did this." "Yes," Delilah said, tears beginning to stream down her face. Lucas's hand settled gently on her shoulders, careful not to press on the scars. "And you defended yourself when he came at you again." "I killed him," Delilah choked out. "I am a murderer." "No." Lucas's voice was firm. He carefully helped her pull her chemise and dress back up, then gently turned her to face him. Tears were in his eyes too. "You are a survivor. What you did was not murder, Delilah. It was survival, pure and simple." The law would not see it that way, she said bitterly. A woman has no right to defend herself against her husband. The law is wrong. Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. I cannot speak to what the authorities might do if they find you, but I can tell you what I know in my heart. You did what you had to do to stay alive, and I do not judge you for it. I cannot judge you for it. How can you say that? Delilah's voice broke. You do not even know me. I know enough. I know you were brave enough to tell me the truth when you could have kept hiding it. I know you survived something that would have broken most people. I know that underneath all that fear, there is strength and kindness and honesty. Lucas's brown eyes searched hers. I know that I want to give you the life you deserve to have all along, a life where you are safe and valued and never have to fear a hand raised in anger. Something in Delilah cracked open then, some wall she had built around her heart to survive. She collapsed against Lucas's chest, sobbing, and he held her carefully, mindful of her injuries, murmuring wordless comfort. They stood like that as the sun set completely and stars began to emerge, Delilah crying out years of pain and fear while Lucas simply held her, offered her the gift of his presence and acceptance. When she finally quieted, Lucas led her to the porch chair and knelt before her. I still want to marry you, Delilah, even more now than before, because now I know who you really are and I am honored that you trusted me with the truth. What if they find me? She asked. What if I bring trouble to your door? Then we will face it together. Lucas took her hands in his. I am not afraid of trouble, and I am not afraid of your past. All I care about is our future, if you will give us that chance. Delilah looked at this man who had shown her more kindness in a few days than she had known in years. She thought about Mrs. Patterson's words, about the right man hearing secrets with an open heart. She thought about the possibility of a life built on honesty and respect rather than fear and control. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Lucas's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He stood and pulled her gently to her feet, then kissed her forehead with a tenderness that made her heart ache. We will do this right. I will court you properly, give you time to heal and trust me. When we marry, it will be because you are ready, not because you feel you have no other choice. I am ready now, Delilah said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I have spent 3 years in fear, Lucas. I do not want to waste another day when I could be building something good. Are you sure? She nodded. I have never been more sure of anything. Lucas took a deep breath. Then we will go to the justice of the peace tomorrow, if you still feel the same in the morning. I will not rush you into something you might regret. But Delilah did not regret it. That night, lying in the guest room at Lucas's ranch, a room he insisted she take while he slept in the barn to preserve propriety, she felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Morning came with Lucas making breakfast, burned bacon and slightly rubbery eggs that Delilah ate gratefully. They rode into Snake River together, and by noon they stood before Justice of the Peace William Crawford, a grizzled man who had been officiating marriages and settling disputes in the territory for 20 years. You, Lucas Henderson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Crawford asked in his gravelly voice. I do, Lucas said firmly, his eyes on Delilah. And do you, Delilah Davis, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Delilah hesitated for just a moment, the weight of her deception about her last name heavy on her conscience. But Lucas squeezed her hand gently and she found her voice. I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride. Lucas leaned down and kissed her softly, a promise and a beginning all at once. Mrs. Patterson threw them a small celebration at the boarding house that evening, inviting what seemed like half the town. Delilah was overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers who welcomed her so readily. Sarah Cross, from the general store, gave them a beautiful quilt she had made. Tom Reed, the blacksmith, presented them with a set of horseshoes he claimed were lucky. Even the dour banker, Ernest Morrison, cracked a smile and wished them well. As the evening wore on and Delilah stood beside her new husband, watching him laugh and talk with his friends, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her past could stay buried and her future could be bright. But the West was changing, and with the railroad expanding and more people coming to the territory every day, the past had a way of catching up with those who ran. Their first weeks of marriage were a revelation for Delilah. Lucas was patient and gentle, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. He slept in the smaller bedroom and gave her space to adjust to living in the house, to feeling safe in a home again. During the days, they worked together on the ranch. Lucas taught her to ride properly, not side saddle as she had learned in Philadelphia, but astride like the ranch women did out here. He showed her how to check the cattle for illness, how to mend fence, how to read the weather in the clouds gathering over the mountains. In return, Delilah brought order to the house and life to the neglected garden. She planted vegetables and herbs, coaxed green shoots from the Wyoming soil that Lucas had despaired of. She mended his clothes and prepared proper meals, discovering that she enjoyed the domestic tasks that had felt like burdens in Philadelphia. More than that, she found herself falling in love. It crept up on her slowly, in the way Lucas always asked her opinion before making decisions about the ranch, in the gentle way he touched her shoulder when passing by, in his patience as she learned to trust again. One evening about a month after their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching another spectacular sunset, Delilah realized she was happy. The realization was so foreign it almost frightened her. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, noticing her expression. "I am thinking that I am happy," Delilah said honestly, "and I am not sure I remember how to be happy." Lucas reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You will remember, we have all the time in the world." That night, Delilah went to Lucas's room instead of her own. He looked up from the book he was reading, surprise and hope warring in his expression. "Delilah, I am tired of sleeping alone," she said quietly. "I am tired of being afraid. I want to be your wife in truth, Lucas." He set the book aside and stood, approaching her carefully as though she might spook. "Are you certain there is no rush?" "I am certain." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, searching her eyes for any sign of doubt. Finding none, he kissed her, deeper than their chaste wedding kiss, and Delilah felt heat bloom in her chest. This was nothing like Richard's demanding, painful pawing. This was gentle and passionate and right. They made love slowly, with Lucas constantly checking that she was comfortable, that nothing hurt. When he saw her scars in the lamplight, he kissed each one reverently, as though he could heal them with tenderness. Delilah cried, but this time from joy rather than pain, from the overwhelming feeling of being cherished. Afterward, lying in Lucas's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, Delilah felt truly safe for the first time since childhood. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Lucas's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. I think I have from the moment you stepped off that stage, looking scared and brave all at once." The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall, and Delilah learned to love the changing seasons of Wyoming. She and Lucas fell into a comfortable rhythm, working the ranch during the day and spending their evenings reading together, talking, planning for the future. Delilah made friends in town. Sarah Cross became a particular confidant, a warm woman about her own age who had moved to Snake River with her husband 3 years prior. They would meet for tea when Delilah came to town for supplies, sharing stories and laughter. It was Sarah who noticed first. "You are glowing," she said one afternoon in late October, studying Delilah over her teacup. "I recognize that look." Delilah felt her cheeks warm. "What look?" "The look of a woman who is with child." Sarah grinned. "Am I right?" Delilah had suspected for a few weeks, but had been almost afraid to believe it. "I think so. I have not told Lucas yet. I wanted to be sure." "Oh, Delilah, that is wonderful. Lucas will be over the moon." But Delilah felt a flutter of fear alongside her joy. Lucas had told her about losing his first wife in childbirth, about the baby that had died with her. What if the same thing happened? What if she could not carry the baby to term? What if she died and left Lucas to grieve all over again? Sarah must have seen the fear in her face because she reached across and squeezed her hand. "Do not borrow trouble. You are young and healthy. Dr. Marsh is skilled, and I will be here to help however I can." That evening, Delilah waited until after dinner to tell Lucas. They were on the porch, bundled in blankets against the autumn chill when she gathered her courage. "Lucas, there is something I need to tell you." He looked at her, concern creasing his brow. "What is it?" "I am with child." For a moment, Lucas just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into a smile so wide and genuine that it transformed him. "Truly, truly." Delilah watched him anxiously. "I know you are worried because of Mary, but I wanted you to know." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am worried," he admitted. "I would be lying if I said I was not. But I am also happy, so happy I could shout it from the mountains. We are going to have a baby." His joy was infectious, and Delilah let herself share it, pushing the fear aside for the moment. They would face whatever came together, just as they had faced everything else. Winter came to Wyoming with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled in drifts and temperatures that plummeted below zero. Lucas worked tirelessly to keep the cattle fed and safe, often coming in from the cold with ice in his beard and exhaustion in his eyes. Delilah made sure there was always hot food and a warm fire waiting, helping him remove his frozen outer layers and rubbing feeling back into his hands. Being pregnant through the winter was challenging. Delilah suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and a bone-deep fatigue that made simple tasks feel monumental. But Lucas was endlessly patient, taking over more of the household chores and insisting she rest. Dr. Marsh, a competent man in his 50s who had practiced medicine in Chicago before moving west, came to the ranch monthly to check on her. "You are healthy and strong," he told her during a visit in January. "The baby is growing well. I see no reason for concern." But concern lived in Lucas's eyes every time he looked at her swelling belly. He had nightmares sometimes, waking gasping and reaching for her, needing to confirm she was still there, still alive. Delilah held him through those dark moments, understanding that his fear came from love. Spring arrived slowly, teasing them with warm days before sending more snow. By April, Delilah was large and uncomfortable, eager for the baby to arrive. She and Sarah had sewn tiny clothes together, and Lucas had built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, carving it with intricate patterns during the long winter evenings. The baby came on a warm May afternoon, arriving faster than expected. Lucas barely had time to fetch Dr. Marsh before Delilah's labor progressed rapidly. Sarah came too, helping the doctor and holding Delilah's hand through the pain. It hurt more than anything Delilah had ever experienced, worse than Richard's beatings, worse than anything she could have imagined. But at the end of it, as the sun set and painted their bedroom in golden light, Dr. Marsh placed a squalling, red-faced baby in her arms. "A boy," he announced with a smile. "Strong and healthy." Delilah looked down at her son, at his tiny fists and scrunched-up face, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "Lucas," she breathed, looking up at her husband who stood beside the bed with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's downy head with one gentle finger. "You are perfect. Thank you, Delilah. Thank you for giving me this." They named him James after Lucas's father, and the little boy became the center of their world. Lucas was a devoted father, waking in the night to help with feedings, walking the floor with James when he fussed, staring at him with wonder as though he could not quite believe this miracle had happened. Delilah had never known such contentment. The ranch flourished, the cattle herd growing as Lucas made smart purchases and trades. The garden produced bountifully under her care, providing vegetables they could eat fresh or preserve for winter, and their little family was healthy and whole. James was 6 months old, just learning to sit up on his own when the past came calling. It was a crisp November afternoon, and Delilah was hanging laundry on the line while James napped in his cradle inside the house. She heard the sound of a horse approaching and looked up, expecting to see Lucas returning from checking the north pasture. Instead, she saw a stranger, a man in a city suit that looked out of place against the Wyoming landscape. He rode up to the house and dismounted, tipping his hat to her. "Good afternoon, madam. I am looking for the Henderson ranch. Would this be it?" Delilah felt a prickle of unease. "It is. Can I help you? My name is Detective Howard Marsh from Philadelphia. I am looking for a woman named Delilah Dawson, wanted for questioning in the death of her husband Richard Dawson." The world seemed to tilt beneath Delilah's feet. After more than a year, after she had finally begun to feel safe, her past had found her. "I do not know anyone by that name," she said, but her voice shook and she saw the detective's eyes sharpen. "Funny thing about being a detective, madam, you learn to read people and you are reading like someone with something to hide." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. "This is Delilah Dawson. Looks an awful lot like you." Delilah stared at the photograph, at her own face looking back at her from what must have been a wedding portrait with Richard. She had been so young then, hopeful and naive, with no idea what her future held. "Where is your husband, Mrs. Henderson?" the detective asked. "I have done nothing wrong," Delilah said, lifting her chin despite her fear. "That is for the courts to decide. Richard Dawson was found dead in his home, skull crushed. His business partners reported his wife missing. Now I find her here, living under a different name, married to another man, makes for an interesting story." "You do not understand," Delilah started, but the detective held up his hand. "I do not need to understand. I need to bring you back to Philadelphia to stand trial." "Stand trial for what?" Lucas's voice came from behind the detective, hard and cold in a way Delilah had never heard it. He must have heard the conversation as he approached. "For defending herself against a man who beat her bloody for 3 years." The detective turned to face Lucas, hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his hip. "Who are you?" "Lucas Henderson, this woman's husband, and you are trespassing on my land, threatening my wife." "I am not threatening anyone. I am doing my job." The detective's eyes flicked between Lucas and Delilah. "Richard Dawson's business partners want justice for his death." "His business partners knew what he was," Delilah said, finding her voice. "They knew he beat me, they saw the bruises, and they did nothing. They just want someone to blame because without Richard, their business is failing. Again, that is for a court to decide. No court would give a woman a fair trial for killing her husband, no matter what he did to her," Lucas said. "You know that as well as I do." The detective shrugged. Maybe so, but it is not my call to make. I have a warrant for her arrest, and I am authorized to bring her back to Pennsylvania. Delilah felt her knees go weak. She could not go back to Philadelphia, could not leave James and Lucas, could not face a trial that would end with her hanging regardless of the truth. "Please," she whispered, "I have a baby, a 6-month-old son who needs his mother." Something flickered in the detective's eyes, a hint of compassion. "I have children myself, Mrs. Henderson. I am sorry truly, but I have a job to do." "How much?" Lucas asked suddenly. "Excuse me, how much are they paying you to bring her back?" "I will double it if you leave here and report that you found no trace of Delilah Dawson." The detective laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You cannot bribe me, Mr. Henderson. I am an honest lawman." "Then be honest about this," Lucas said, moving to stand beside Delilah, taking her hand in his. "You have seen my wife. Does she look like a murderer to you, or does she look like a woman who has finally found peace after surviving hell? What I think does not matter. It matters to me." Lucas squeezed Delilah's hand. "It should matter to you too if you are half the man you claim to be." For a long moment the detective was silent, studying them both. Then he sighed heavily. "Show me." "Show you what?" Delilah asked. "The scars. If your husband did what you claim, show me the evidence." Delilah looked at Lucas, who nodded encouragingly. With shaking hands, she turned her back to the detective and lowered her dress and chemise enough to reveal the worst of the scarring across her shoulders. She heard the detective's sharp intake of breath. "My God," he muttered. "How long did he do this to you?" "3 years," Delilah said quietly, pulling her clothes back into place and turning to face him. "I tried to leave. I tried to get help. No one would help me because he was my husband, and that gave him the right to do whatever he wanted. So when he came at me again, drunk and violent, I fought back. I did not mean to kill him, but I would do it again to survive." The detective rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking older and more tired. "Richard Dawson's business partners painted a very different picture. Said you were a difficult wife, that Richard was patient and kind, that his death was unprovoked murder." "They lied to protect their interests and Richard's reputation," Delilah said. "Why would they admit to knowing about the abuse? That would make them complicit in their silence." The detective looked at Lucas. "You believe her story. I know it is true. I have seen the scars, heard the pain in her voice when she speaks of that time. My wife is one of the strongest, bravest women I have ever known, and I will not let you take her away to face a trial rigged against her from the start. You would fight the law to protect her." "I would fight anyone to protect my family," Lucas said firmly. The detective was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something internal. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper, the warrant for Delilah's arrest. He looked at it, then at Delilah, then at the house where James was sleeping. "I came a long way for nothing," he said slowly. "Tracked leads all through the territories, but they all turned out to be dead ends. Delilah Dawson must have headed east, maybe back toward the big cities where someone can disappear easier. Certainly did not come to Wyoming." Hope flared in Delilah's chest. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I found no trace of the woman I was looking for. Far as I am concerned, Delilah Dawson vanished and I have no leads to pursue further." He tucked the warrant back into his jacket. "But if I were her, I would be careful. Stay out of Philadelphia, stay out of Pennsylvania entirely. Those business partners have resources and connections. They might send someone else." "Thank you," Delilah breathed. "Thank you so much." The detective mounted his horse, then paused to look down at them. "For what it is worth, I am sorry for what you went through. No one deserves that, and the law should protect people like you instead of persecuting them. But the law is written by men, and men are not always just." "The law might not be just, but you are," Lucas said. That took courage. What you are doing, or foolishness, time will tell. The detective tipped his hat to them both. Good luck to you, Mrs. Henderson. You have built a good life here. Hold on to it. They watched him ride away, standing together until he disappeared from sight. Only then did Delilah allow her legs to give out, sinking to the ground as relief and residual fear washed over her. Lucas knelt beside her, gathering her into his arms. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "It is truly over. What if he changes his mind? What if someone else comes? Then we will face it together, just like we faced this." Lucas pulled back to look at her, his brown eyes fierce with love and determination. "I meant what I said, Delilah. I will protect you and James with everything I have. You are my family, my life, and nothing and no one will take you from me." From inside the house came James's cry, waking from his nap. Delilah wiped her eyes and stood, Lucas helping her up. "I should feed him. I will come with you. We should probably talk about this, decide if we need to take precautions." But as Delilah fed James, watching his little face scrunch up in concentration as he nursed, with Lucas sitting beside them and stroking their son's soft hair, she felt the fear begin to recede. The detective could have arrested her, could have forced her back to Philadelphia to face trial and almost certain execution. Instead, he had chosen mercy. Maybe the West really was different. Maybe here, far from the rigid social structures and corrupt systems of the East, people could be judged on who they were rather than what society dictated they should be. Over the following weeks, Delilah waited anxiously for another detective to arrive, for the past to reach out again. But as fall turned to winter and then to spring again, no one came. It seemed Detective Marsh had been true to his word, reporting that his search had turned up nothing. Life on the ranch continued, marked by the changing seasons and James's milestones. He took his first steps just before his first birthday, tottering between Lucas and Delilah while they cheered him on. He said his first word, "Da," which made Lucas beam with pride even as Delilah pretended to be offended that Mama had not come first. On their second wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Delilah by taking her into town for a special dinner at the restaurant, leaving James with Sarah and Martin Cross for the evening. Over steak and potatoes, he pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know we have been married 2 years already, but I never properly gave you a ring," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I saved up for it, wanted to get you something that showed how much you mean to me." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes as Lucas slid the ring onto her finger beside the plain band they had used for the ceremony. "Lucas, it is beautiful. You did not need to do this. I wanted to. You gave me everything I hoped for and so much more. A home that is filled with love and laughter, a son who is the joy of my life, a partnership that makes every day better." Lucas raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "I love you, Delilah Henderson, not despite your past but including all of it, because it made you who you are." "I love you too," Delilah said, her heart full to bursting. "You gave me a life I never thought I could have. You showed me what real love looks like, what a real marriage should be. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." They danced that night to a fiddler's tune, Lucas holding her close and whispering sweet words in her ear. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Delilah felt no shadow of fear hanging over her, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was simply happy, purely and completely. The years flowed by like the river the town was named for, steady and life-giving. James grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch, learning to ride and rope and care for the animals. When he was 3, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Mary, after Lucas's first wife. Lucas had cried when Delilah suggested the name, touched that she wanted to honor the woman who had come before. Mary was followed 2 years later by another boy, Thomas, and then another daughter, Elizabeth. Their house rang with children's voices, with laughter and occasional tears, with the beautiful chaos of a growing family. Lucas expanded the ranch, buying adjoining land and building the larger barn he had always dreamed of. He started breeding horses as he had planned, developing a reputation for quality stock that brought buyers from across the territory. Delilah's garden grew too, becoming large enough that she sold produce and preserves in town, her earnings going into a savings account for the children's future. Snake River grew along with them. The railroad came through in 1881, bringing more settlers and greater prosperity. The town got a proper schoolhouse, and Delilah volunteered to help teach the younger children their letters. She made deep friendships with other ranch wives, women who had also come west seeking new starts and found them in the wild, beautiful territory. Sarah Cross remained one of her closest friends, and they watched their children grow up together, James and Sarah's daughter Katie becoming inseparable playmates. The community they built was strong and supportive, people who looked out for one another through harsh winters and dry summers, through sickness and health. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep and the ranch work was done, Delilah and Lucas would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, just as they had in the early days of their marriage. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories and dreams. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, content in each other's presence. "You ever think about Philadelphia?" Lucas asked one such evening when James was 10 and the younger children were tucked safely in their beds. Delilah considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. But not with longing. More like remembering a bad dream after you have woken up. That life feels like it happened to someone else. Do you ever regret coming west, taking the risk of answering my advertisement? Never. Not for a single moment." Delilah squeezed his hand. "You gave me everything, Lucas. A home, a family, safety, love. You listened when I told you my darkest secrets and loved me anyway. How could I regret that? I got the better end of the deal," Lucas said with a smile. "I was looking for a wife, and I found a partner, a best friend, the love of my life, and the mother of my children, all in one incredible woman." They had challenges, of course. The winter of 1886 was brutal, and they lost a quarter of their herd to the cold and snow. Thomas caught pneumonia when he was 5, and for a week Delilah and Lucas took turns sitting by his bedside, praying he would survive. He did, but those days of fear reminded them how fragile life could be. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating the good. When Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, they took the whole family to Cheyenne for the celebration, marveling at how much had changed since Delilah first arrived in the territory 14 years earlier. James grew into a fine young man, serious and hardworking like his father, but with a gentle kindness that reminded Delilah of Lucas's best qualities. At 18, he announced his intention to court Katie Cross, and both families celebrated the match. They married the following year, and Lucas helped them build a small house on the far edge of the ranch property. Mary became a teacher, taking over the schoolhouse when the previous teacher retired. Thomas wanted to be a veterinarian, fascinated by animal medicine and healing. Elizabeth was still finding her way, but she had a gift for horses that rivaled her father's. On Delilah and Lucas's 20th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party, inviting what seemed like the entire town to the ranch. As Delilah looked around at the crowd of friends and neighbors, at her children and their families, at Lucas standing beside her with silver threading through his dark hair. She was overwhelmed with gratitude. "Speech!" someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant. Delilah laughed and held up her hands for quiet. When the noise died down, she looked at Lucas, then at the assembled crowd. 20 years ago, I stepped off a stagecoach in Snake River, terrified and carrying secrets that I was sure would destroy any chance at happiness. But I met a man who showed me what real love looks like. Lucas taught me that love is not about control or possession. It is about partnership and respect and choosing each other every single day. She had to pause to wipe tears from her eyes, and Lucas put his arm around her waist, holding her steady. He taught me that the past does not have to define the future, that secrets shared with the right person become burdens halved rather than sources of shame. He gave me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible, and I thank God every day that I was brave enough to answer his advertisement. "Best decision I ever made was placing that ad," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Delilah has been my rock, my joy, my everything. Here is to 20 more years, and 20 after that." The crowd cheered and toasted, and the party continued late into the night with music and dancing and storytelling. Delilah danced with Lucas, with her children, with friends old and new. She felt young again, remembering that scared woman who had arrived with such heavy secrets, and marveling at how much healing was possible when love was real. Late that night, after the last guests had left and the children had gone to their own homes or beds, Delilah and Lucas walked out to the porch one more time. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. "Do you remember what you said to me that first week when I told you everything?" Delilah asked, leaning against Lucas's solid warmth. "I said a lot of things that week. You told me you wanted a partner to build a life with, to share the good times and weather the hard ones together. You said you wanted companionship with someone you could respect." Delilah turned to look up at him. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle now as it had been that first time. "I found so much more than I was looking for. I found my soulmate, Delilah, my other half, the person who makes me want to be better every day." He kissed her then, and it was sweet and familiar and still capable of making her heart flutter after 20 years. As they stood there under the stars, Delilah thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and fear of her first marriage, the desperate flight west, the terror of arriving in a strange place to meet a stranger, the risk of revealing her secrets and the miracle of being accepted anyway, the slow building of trust and love, the creation of a family and a life. She thought about Detective Marsh, wherever he was, and sent a silent prayer of thanks for his mercy. She thought about all the women still trapped in situations like she had been, without escape or hope, and wished she could save them all. But mostly she thought about the man beside her, who had listened without judgment and loved her anyway, who had shown her that happiness was possible even after the darkest times. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, as he so often did. "I am thinking that I am grateful," Delilah said simply, "for everything. For you, for our children, for this life we built together, for second chances and new beginnings." "Me too," Lucas said, pulling her close. "Me too." They went inside together, to the house they had filled with love and laughter, to the bed they had shared for 20 years. And as Delilah drifted off to sleep in Lucas's arms, she felt complete and utter peace. The years continued to unfold gently. James and Katie had their first child, a boy they named Lucas after his grandfather. Thomas went east to study veterinary medicine and returned 3 years later with a wife and a degree, setting up practice in Snake River. Mary married a schoolteacher from Cheyenne, and they built a life dedicated to education. Elizabeth eventually married a horse breeder from Montana, and together, they started a successful breeding program that became known throughout the West. Lucas and Delilah became grandparents many times over, their house often filled with the sound of grandchildren playing and exploring. Lucas taught the boys to rope and ride, while Delilah taught the girls to garden and cook, though she made sure the girls learned ranching skills too, and the boys knew their way around a kitchen. The world was changing, and she wanted all her grandchildren to be prepared for whatever future they chose. As they grew older, Lucas's hair went fully silver and Delilah's dark locks streaked with gray. Their hands became weathered from years of hard work, but they still fit perfectly together. Their steps grew slower, but they still took evening walks around the property, remembering and dreaming on their 30th anniversary. Surrounded by children and grandchildren, Lucas stood and raised a glass. 30 years ago, I was a lonely rancher who took a chance on a mail-order bride. I had no idea that woman would become my entire world. Delilah, you have given me a life richer than I ever imagined. You are my love, my partner, my best friend. Here is to the woman who took a scared leap of faith and landed right where she belonged. Delilah stood and kissed him to the cheers of their family. And here is to the man who caught me when I jumped, who gave me a safe place to land, who showed me that love can heal even the deepest wounds. They lived many more good years together, watching their grandchildren grow, seeing Snake River transform from a rough frontier town into a thriving small city. The ranch prospered under James's management, as Lucas gradually handed over more responsibility, content, to spend his later years enjoying rather than working. When Lucas was 65, he became ill with a lung ailment that the doctors could not cure. Delilah nursed him tenderly through the months of his decline, just as he had cared for her through 4 pregnancies and various illnesses over the years. She read to him, held his hand, reminded him of their many adventures together. On a warm spring evening with apple blossoms blooming outside their window and Delilah sitting beside his bed holding his hand, Lucas took his last breath. His final words were, "Thank you for saying yes." Delilah grieved deeply, the loss of her partner of 35 years leaving a hole in her heart. But she was surrounded by love, by children and grandchildren who supported her through the darkness. She found comfort in the legacy they had built together, in the family they had created from nothing but hope and determination. She lived another 10 years as a widow, active and involved in her family's lives, still tending her garden and teaching her great-grandchildren the things Lucas had taught her about the land. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the early days of Snake River, about how love and courage could overcome any obstacle. When Delilah passed peacefully in her sleep at 73, she was buried beside Lucas on a hilltop overlooking their ranch. Their children erected a simple headstone that read, "Lucas and Delilah Henderson, partners in life, united in eternity." They built their love on honesty and faith. The ranch continued under James's care and eventually passed to his children. The garden Delilah had started still bloomed every spring. And the story of the mail-order bride who arrived with secrets and the rancher who loved her anyway became family legend, told and retold through generations. It was a story about second chances and the courage to be vulnerable, about the power of acceptance and the healing that comes from being truly seen and loved, about 2 people who took a risk on each other and built something beautiful that lasted beyond their lifetimes. And every spring, when the apple blossoms bloomed on that Wyoming hilltop, it seemed like the land itself remembered their love story, celebrating the legacy of Delilah and Lucas Henderson, the mail-order bride and the rancher who listened without judgment and loved her anyway.